Welcome into episode 470 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Scott McLaughlin. Scott, we have some items we want to get to today. We also have a mailbag for the second half of the episode, but I quickly wanted to mention that next week we will only be doing one episode between the Jimmy Fund going on and obligations for you, and Bridget's going to be away on vacation. So we're going to have one episode next week, and it's going to be a much larger full episode mailbag. So for those that want to submit their questions, you do so at theskatepod@weei.com, on Twitter, on YouTube, and we're going to collect all of them, and we will do that next week.
Yeah, so last episode, this episode, we're kind of just going through questions that have piled up that we just didn't get to in previous episodes, but we actually haven't done a call for questions in a while, so we did want to do that right off the top. Yeah, send us whatever. Off-season stuff, prospects, Hagens, upcoming season, jerseys. We just got a jersey question this morning that we'll get to later. So at least the two of us are always down for those. Bridget might set those ones out, but
yeah, Scott, I got to tell you, and you mentioned it last episode, and I I don't want to keep adding to this, but I couldn't believe my ears when Bridget said that the uniforms were just okay. I feel like she regretted it right away. She was like, "See, I wish you went first because I don't really know." But then the next episode, she doubled down when you were on, and she's like, "Yeah, they're just okay." I'm like, "Oh boy, I don't know."
Yeah, I mean that's good. Like you got to stick with your take. You can't just change because everyone's telling you it's a crazy take.
Yep, got to respect it.
Yeah.
All right, so Scott, let's get to the opening shifts, and let's go right to you because you were able to be the first to officially break what was well-known, well-rumored news, but you officially broke it.
Yeah, so I was at on Wednesday, the Bruins, TD Garden, Salvation Army, and the city of Boston all get together for their annual back to school celebration, which is they collect and then give out backpacks to local kids for the upcoming school year. Obviously, good cause. I believe I heard that they handed out around 3,000 backpacks yesterday. So that's obviously great. And some Bruins players and prospect were on hand. Mason Lohrei, Johnny Beecher, and perhaps most notably, James Hagens. And they all met with media. So I just asked Hagens, like, going back to BC, is that official? And he said yes, and explained the decision. I wrote this up for weei.com if people want to go there. I tweeted out the video on my Twitter account. We retweeted on the Skate Pod. But he said, yeah, it's definitely something that I talked about a lot with my family, the staff with the Bruins. I'm excited. I can't wait to get back, especially with the group of guys that we have. So I asked him, like, what made this ultimately the right decision for him? And he said, it's just not rushing the process. To be able to get picked by Boston, to be able to know where you are, just super grateful. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. There's no reason to rush anything. So they're all conversations that you have to have. There's a different timeline for everyone. So it's just kind of thought about what the right step in the process would be. So yeah, we can definitely get more into this after your opening shift. But like you said, expected news. He had talked to NHL.com and a couple weeks ago at the World Junior Showcase, and you could clearly just tell by like his comments that he was probably going back to BC, but now it is official on the record.
All right, so yeah, we'll hop back to that. And Scott, I want to talk about a list that NHL Network put out recently, and it was their top 20 NHL defensemen ranked as of right now. One Bruin did make the list, and that's Charlie McAvoy. Now, I don't think there's any surprise that Charlie McAvoy would be in a top 20 defenseman listing, especially when he's on his game. I'm going to imagine that you know where he fell, Scott, so I'm not going to ask you. But for those who didn't see the list, Charlie McAvoy ranked 11th among current NHL defensemen. So when I first saw that, Scott, I was kind of like, eh, that's kind of a fortunate ranking right now for you, Charlie. I think based on the last year and a half. I don't think not that he shouldn't be or couldn't be a top 10 when he's on his game. I just think the last year and a half he hasn't you said it best in a recent episode, maybe like a month ago. The best way to describe his game the last year and a half has been inconsistent. And so for that reason and that reason alone, I thought it was I thought he was ranked around where he should have been, where based on his inconsistencies. I think he could be higher if he were to be more consistent, uh, play more consistently towards his ceiling.
Yeah, I think same reaction as you, like mildly surprised that he was still 11th. But not shocked. Like if anything, I might have expected 2 or 3 places lower, maybe 15 like at the lowest. Because and I've made this point before, the way that people around the NHL and around the hockey world view Charlie McAvoy is, I think, sometimes higher than people here actually view him. And maybe that's because the point totals aren't as high as some other top defensemen. Maybe it's just because he has been battling injuries, but people around the league, like, I always frame it like, or I won't say always. I like to frame it this way: if you asked NHL people, "Hey, pick a defenseman to start your team with," just like simple that question, you would not get far before Charlie McAvoy's name would come up. In fact, I don't think you'd get 10 others. Like he'd be well within the first 10 names mentioned. Because yeah, the guys who can do a lot offensively, and like we can actually, we can just go through this ranking, but like Evan Bouchard is ahead of him. And that's totally reasonable based on what they've done recently. Like Evan Bouchard puts up a ton of points. He's put up a ton of points in the playoffs. He's been on teams that have gone on long runs. Like I get that. I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone in an NHL front office who, if you said, "Hey, you're starting a team to win in the next 3 years," I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would take Evan Bouchard over Charlie McAvoy, just because of what they would value, which is they want that guy who plays 2 ways and who brings some physicality. And Charlie McAvoy does that. And I know we've only seen it, we haven't seen it consistently as people would like. You obviously saw it in a very brief flash at Four Nations Face Off. But I think the fact that people know he can do that is what keeps him up on rankings like these and prevents him from slipping too far.
Yeah, well said, Scott. And conversely, I do think that's why you see locally, you'll see fans be a little bit more down on him than the national or even international perception of him because fans see what he's capable of. But because of the lack of consistency, again, certainly in the last year and a half or so, it leaves fans with the question, why don't we see this all the time? And it's probably a combination of reasons, but I think that I don't fans that are down on Mac, most fans, you'll have some fans that are just very irrational and they hate just to hate. They would say Bobby Orr sucks if they could. But I think a lot of the fans, the rational fans who are down on Charlie, it's less to do with his skill set and more to do with why doesn't he do it more often. I think offensively, there's certainly fair questions about his offensive ceiling, right? Why does he struggle so much in the power play? Maybe he's not as good offensively as we think. Some fans will say, and I think that's totally fair. Maybe his offensive ceiling isn't what maybe we thought it was the first couple of years of his career. But if we're talking two-way game and just overall play, I do think Charlie is at his best when he's being physical and defending, and when he's doing those things, I think the offensive rhythm kind of comes to him too. But consistency is key, and he has to be more consistent going forward, and that the the tough part about consistency is you need to be available, right? And sometimes injuries are just shit luck, and that's part of being consistent too, is being consistently available. So that's something he's going to have to battle through too. He has had some injuries throughout his career, Scott. Like he's had multiple infections, which are those are freak things, right? He different spots, but I think didn't he have like a skate cut early in his career? That
Yeah, I forget exactly what it was, but there was something, and unfortunately, like once you've had like an infection, you're more susceptible to it going forward. So you have to be careful. And also, unfortunately, he's had multiple shoulder injuries, which is concerning because that's also something that can then reoccur more. And when you're talking about someone who plays physical and is at his best when he's playing physical, like I think for both McAvoy and for fans watching him, like there's gonna have to be a process of kind of trusting that again, where we know McAvoy's gonna throw hits, like that's gonna be part of his game, but there might be a buildup where he needs to do it enough to like truly believe like, okay, I'm past the shoulder issues. I can do this and I can stay healthy and it feels good. And fans might need to see that before they can buy in that like, okay, McAvoy can play this way and hold up for a whole season. That first month, if he's out there throwing 4 or 5 hits in a game and you're looking at the contact on the shoulder, like I think there understandably could be some nerves of like, kind of hold your breath for a split second. All right, make sure he's okay. Okay, he's playing on, he's still going, he's throwing another hit the next shift. Like that's sort of the nature of being a player who has had those injuries and also of a fan watching a player that has had those injuries.
Yeah, I think that's probably what leads to some inconsistencies is he's probably pacing himself, right? Physically over the course of an 82 game season where you can't play every game like it's game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, right? But do you think that that can be problematic? Do you think that could lead to bad habits? And it's a physical sport. So you can't you can try to pace yourself and pick and choose your spots, but physicality it's a part of the game. So I feel like players they can just create bad habits when they just they pick and choose a game, or they pick and choose a week where they want to turn it on and turn it off and pace themselves for ultimately what could be a 2-month playoff grind. And you want to it's about working smart, not hard, right? That kind of, but it's a slippery slope. And I think sometimes when players play hesitant, I think that's when injuries can also happen because you're not being assertive.
Yeah, it can, but I also I think McAvoy's been around long enough that he does understand maybe like two slightly different things. Like you're right about the managing your body throughout a whole season and knowing what that balance is, which Matt as I said, like McAvoy's gonna have to find that again because it just hasn't been there for a couple years. But what I do know that he can do is like he can time when the team needs him to step up physically. Because we've seen that. Like if they're if it's a game that's in hand, one way or the other, either they're up by 2-3 goals or down by 2-3 goals, like, he's not gonna be running around like a chicken with his head cut off. Like he knows how to be in control. But then you also see times where like maybe a game's a little flat, maybe the team's down by one and needs something. Maybe it's a tie game and there needs to be some sort of push. And he's the one who steps up with the big hit and creates that momentum. So I think he gets that aspect. Like I think he is someone who can turn it on for a shift, a period, or maybe turn it on isn't the right word, but turn it up a level. Um, and I do think part of what the Bruins have tried to do in recent years and probably again this offseason is find more guys who can do that so it doesn't just have to be McAvoy or in his own way Brad Marchand, who could we would always hear about him dragging teammates into the fight. Like I do think part of what the Bruins are trying to do is, whether it's Zadorov or Kaslik last year, now Tanner Jeannot, is find guys who can bring that energy and supplement it so it doesn't always have to be this game could really use some kind of momentum change. Charlie, go throw a big hit. Like, no, you need more than one player who can do that. And I think they're trying to insulate McAvoy or, add to it so it's not always going to be on him.
Yeah, and the big hit is something he definitely has in his arsenal, and that's something that you can't do that every game, right? Even Scott Stevens didn't do that every game. But when I talk about McAvoy needing to assert himself physically more, to me it's all over the ice, right? Like it's those 50-50 loose puck battles to keep an offensive zone time alive at the blue line. It's not being afraid to jump into the offense and use your skating ability and get defensive coverage with their head on the swivel and taking that puck to the net or taking a puck to an area where there might be some body contact. Just and this is not a McAvoy thing necessarily. It's kind of an NHL game today, the way it's played. A lot of times, NHL regular season hockey, because the season is so long and because the game is so much more structured systemically with teams X's and O's wise than it was in the 90s and 80s and even before then, of course. The game just sometimes gets a little bit. It's like playing. It's like playing checkers out there. Like it's systems versus systems. It's kind of robotic at times. There's, Scott, you're at the Garden 41 games a year. Like there are nights when you go there and you're covering a team and you're on the ninth floor and you're probably driving home being like, that was just a very uneventful robotic game. And I think it's because the game is just more, it's coached up more. It relies more on systems and forechecking and D zone coverage and neutral zone coverage and also players are pacing themselves, right? So I guess what I'm saying is I just think Charlie needs to not he just needs to assert himself more, not simply open ice hits, but just taking pucks to the net, not being afraid of meeting a guy halfway, right, for a loose puck at the blue line to keep a play alive. Little things like that I just think go a long way when you want to be one of the best defensemen in the world.
Yeah, I also think about in front of his own net, and like specifically multiple times last season. Probably most of when he was paired with Mason Lohrei, who we've covered has his issues in the D zone at times, and they'd get pinned in. Sometimes there'd be scrambles down low around the net, and it's like you all of a sudden like it's in the back of the net, and like you look at the replay, and McAvoy's looking around for the puck, can't quite find it. Someone else pounces on it quick enough, and there's times during those situations where you're like, maybe if you can't quite find the puck, like just push someone out of the way, like just clear people out, like, and so I think of that as like another situation of what you're talking about, of like asserting yourself physically, where it's like that doesn't have to be a big hit, that doesn't have to be like physically taxing, but like muscle body position just to clear people away. Yeah, obviously it'd be great if you locate the puck, you clear it away, get a breakout going, but sometimes it's so hectic that you're not going to do that. So maybe go more with the like brute force approach.
Exactly, Scott. That's a good example as well. It's just a matter of you need to outcompete the guy across from you for loose pucks and for body position. If you do that 90% of the time, then you'll get the results that you want, and then the rest of your game opens up. So it's just about, and look, Charlie McAvoy he's an incredible competitor, and he's on this list we're talking about for a reason. So he does these things as well as most people in the world today at the sport. I'm just saying it's something that we're talking about his inconsistencies the last couple of years, and I just think that along with health, those things they'll go a long way.
Yeah, I want to just run through this list quickly and just see if we think anything kind of seems out of place or maybe that we would move around. So I'll go in chunks of 5. So top 5: 1, Cale Makar; 2, Quinn Hughes; 3, Zach Werenski; 4, Miro Heiskanen; 5, Victor Hedman. Any issues there?
If we're going on last year, I mean, I'm just pulling up the list in front of me. I don't have a ton of issues. I mean, has Zach Werenski been on this list any year prior to this, and if he was it closer to 20? I think that he got a major bump from a incredible year last year, right? Norris finalist. I think he was third in Norris voting.
Yeah.
So if we're going based on last year, I think Werenski, is where he should be on this list heading into next season, I suppose. But I don't think he's had a track record to this point in his career being a top 5 D-man in the league. I think that's a little premature. Maybe could we see it for another year or two of being a top 3 or 4 Norris guy? I think that's a little bit recency bias for him, which is, fine, I guess. But that stood out to me, and then that's the one that stood out to me most, I guess, of those guys.
Yeah. So then 6, Josh Morrissey, 7, Rasmus Dahlin, 8, Jacob Slavin, 9, Roman Yossi, 10, Evan Bouchard.
So a couple names here that I'm just looking at is Josh Morrissey. I hand to the sky. I don't know as much about him because he plays in Winnipeg. They're not a major TV market, and they're not on national television a lot. I know what his offensive numbers are. I can't say I watch enough Jets hockey where I get to see his defensive game. And I know that people say he is slept on around the league. This list clearly is giving him credit. So let's stick with Morrissey, Scott. Have you seen enough of him to justify this ranking for him, or do you think he's a player that you and I don't get to see as much, and he is on this list where he deserves to be?
Yeah, I think like bubble top 5 is really fair for him. I've had him top 5 in my Norris ballot each of the last 2 seasons, so I can't sit here and say I'd have him any lower than that. I think like when I watch, it's a couple things. Like when I watch Winnipeg, sometimes I'm not totally blown away by him, but I also tend to watch. I watch way more Winnipeg in the playoffs than the regular season, and that team just tends to underperform in the playoffs. Obviously, their goalie really underperforms in the playoffs, so it's almost like that maybe clouds it a little bit. And I know how you play in the playoffs should be part of this, but like I don't think Josh Morrissey's been bad in the playoffs. I think he just doesn't really blow you away, but he's a guy like so. I like to use analytics and numbers as a tool when I do my awards voting. It's certainly not the only thing. I do try to watch every team as much as possible, but obviously you can't watch 82 games or even 25 of every team in the league. But like everything about his analytics like is usually great. It's like, oh, Winnipeg's an incredible 5-on-5 team when he's on the ice. He's on their top power play and they're top 5 in the league. He's part of their penalty kill, and their penalty kill is always really good. And it's like, well, he must be doing something right. Like, I know some of the top forwards on that team are not very good defensively. Scheifele, Kyle Connor. So someone's, it's not just Connor Hellebuck. Like, I'm talking like scoring chances, high dangers, all that are all like really good. So it's like someone's making those good. And my bet is it's more Josh Morrissey than it is Scheifele or Connor or those guys. So yeah, that feels pretty fair to me.
Yeah, I just wish I got to see more of them. I mean, like I said, the Jets just aren't featured enough, rarely ever, in the U.S. on national TV. Like, honestly, like outside of the playoffs, have the Jets ever had a regular season game on U.S. national television?
Probably not. I mean, like even like the bigger Canadian teams don't get a ton. Like Connor McDavid might get late night games, might get an occasional Toronto game, but like, yeah, that they don't do great for US TV, so we don't really get them.
So I'll throw it to you, Scott, with these top 10 players. Evan Bouchard, listen, the offensive numbers, I get why he's there. I think defensively he is, leaves much to be desired, but I understand offensively, you put up the numbers you're going to be a top 10 defenseman on a list like this. But when you talk about McAvoy, right, which of these players in the top 10, and let's call it what it is, it's really 6 through 10 because Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, Well, I mean, like I said, though, Zach Werenski I think he has to prove it again and again to be on that list where he is. But who do you think in this top 10 list is vulnerable to Charlie McAvoy surpassing them on this list? You mentioned if you were starting a team in the league, you don't think there'd be 10 defensemen in front of them. So which of these defensemen on the front half of this list do you think you would take McAvoy before? And then we can play this with the back. After you answer that, we can play it with the back too, because there are some players, 12 through 20 who are so young. Maybe they might be lower on this list, but maybe somebody would like to see them start a team with them. Like would a Lane Hudson or a Brock Faber be somebody, or a Jake Sanderson or a Thomas Harley? Would somebody want to start a team with them over some of the guys in the top 10 because of their youth?
Yeah, and that's where like I would try to limit it to like the next 2 to 3 years, because you're right. Like if you say like, hey, you're just starting a franchise, like yeah, then you are going to go for the young guy that you're going to have 10 years of their prime instead of 2 to 3. But yeah, I think a lot of people would take McAvoy over Bouchard just because of the defense. I wonder about Jacob Slavin, and like this is actually like a really interesting comp for McAvoy, because we all saw at Four Nations like how good defensively Jacob Slavin is. He doesn't put up a whole lot of points, which is why he doesn't get Norris votes, or it doesn't get like top 5 Norris votes. Like that is part of it. Like what you can contribute offensively is part of it. And I think McAvoy can definitely do more offensively than Slavin. But again, like it's been a little bit since we've seen it. So, like that, it's like that's kind of a good comparison point, because it's like, is he going to end up being kind of just Jacob Slavin, where it's, and I say just, but you know what I mean? Like defensively really sound, but maybe the offense just kind of remains limited? Or can he be clearly better than Jacob Slavin because he's just as good or very close defensively and does much more offensively? So that'd be a guy he could get ahead of. Roman Yossi's interesting here. He's 35 now. If you're going off career and past history, I think it's fair to say Roman Josi would be higher than 9. But he had a down year last year. He battled injuries. Even when he was healthy, his production, his on-ice metrics were way off where they usually are. So, is that the sign of like a start of his decline in his mid-30s? Or was last year just a mess for Nashville, just like it was a mess for Boston? And if the team around him is a little better, he gets back to elite status. Like, I don't know, actually. Like, that's going to be interesting to see what Josi does this year.
Yeah, no, those names are the ones I would highlight too. Looking at McAvoy, it is interesting, Scott, because he made his debut in the 2017 playoffs, but his first regular season in the NHL was the 2017-18 season. So he's 8 years into his career, and here we are 8 years later, and I keep finding myself saying, I think McAvoy is capable of doing more offensively. It's like, well, at what point is a guy approaching 30 and maybe he is who he like? Is he going to be 34 and I'm going to be saying, I think there's more to McAvoy's game offensively potentially. And you look at his track record, and he hasn't been the most durable player throughout his career. And I'm just going down. I mean, so 2017-18, his first full season in the NHL, he played 63 games. So he missed almost 20 games. 18-19, he played 54 games, right? 19-20, he played 67 games. Now I think that's because the season was canceled because of COVID. So that's probably what that was. 2021, he played 51 games. That was a shortened schedule, so that may have been 90+% of the schedule that he played. 21-22, he played 78 games. That's great. 22-23, he played 67. We know he came off of off-season surgery. And then 23-24, he played 74 games. So he missed 8 games the year before last, and he missed 32 games last year. And then offensively, his point totals are 32, 28, 32, 30, 56, 52, 47, 23. Now, like I said, those come from an array of seasons that were injury seasons, missed games, or the season was canceled due to COVID, or it was a shortened season. So there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not fair to say all those points came in a full 82 game season, because it's not the case. But does his availability concern you? I think that's kind of what we've been getting at too with the consistencies. But like, it concerns me. He's never played a full NHL season. Like, you look at David Pastrnak. David Pastrnak, I think, has played 3 straight full 82 game seasons. Now you could say it's a different position, but hey, you're on the ice every night taking hits. And so again, the best ability is availability. And man, it's not going to get easier the older he gets, right? So it is kind of concerning for me.
Yeah, it has to be. Like, again, until you see it, until you see him come out this season, next season, whenever, and play 80 games, it's going to be a completely fair question. And I also think that, when we talk about like those point totals, and, even if you go by, say, points per game, it's like 21-22 and 22-23 is over 0.7 points per game. 23-24, 0.64. And then like last year, even before the injury, it was 0.46 points per game. Like that's a big drop off. That's back to, I mean, he was even above that level like as a rookie in his second year. He was slightly above that. So some of that's obviously the team around him. We know last year's team just wasn't good, and especially wasn't good offensively. But I do think him staying healthier and being on the ice, like, will just naturally lead to more production, because he'll actually be able to get that confidence back, and not have to be playing timid or cautious or anything like that. So, yeah, it's a fair concern. So just to wrap this up before we move on. So McAvoy's 11th. The names behind him are interesting. 12, Gustav Forsling of the Panthers. 13, Jake Sanderson, young defenseman with the Senators. 14, Thomas Harley of Dallas. 15, Shea Theodore out in Vegas. 16, Adam Fox. Big drop off, I think, probably primarily because of Four Nations, honestly, where he really struggled. 17, Devon Taves. 18, Mikhail Sergachev. 19, Lane Hudson. And 20, Brock Faber. I like that Forsling, Sanderson, Harley group right behind McAvoy. I could see an argument for like any of those guys over McAvoy right now. Again, I do think McAvoy at his best is better than those guys. But I mean, I had Thomas Harley top 5 in my Norse battle last year. So I think personally, like, I'd probably have him higher than 14th. Sanderson looked really good at Four Nations for the US, as did Harley for Canada. Forsling, we've seen what he can do in the playoffs for Florida. So yeah, like that feels kind of like the group where it's like, all right, I get McAvoy staying ahead of them for now, but you could also see if McAvoy does have a bit of a down year, then all of a sudden he is down to 14th or 15th on a list like this.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And Harley's an interesting one, because he kind of flew under the radar. I don't think most people knew who he was at all prior to being I mean, he became a story at Four Nations because I forget what was the reason he made the team again at the last second.
So it was, who was it that got knocked out of the tournament? Was it? So I think Pietrangelo withdrew right before.
Theodore?
That kind of put him on standby. And then I think Cale Makar was sick, and they needed to bring in a body.
And Shea Theodore was hurt, right?
Oh, yeah. Theodore was hurt too. So yeah, like kind of like that whole combination, because yeah, he was basically like back home, but he was just on standby. I think he said he even canceled a vacation that he had because he wanted to be that next man up if they needed him. And then he gets called in and wound up playing great. And it has the interesting backstory of, internationally, he could have picked Canada or the US because he had dual citizenship. And I mean, I'll say, unfortunately for us, he picked Canada. the U.S. still has a really great defense core, so like it's hard to complain. But yeah, I mean he's great.
And he was a first round draft pick in 2019. So it's been 6 years since he walked across that stage. Not exactly a new prize prospect that people were talking about in the hockey world. And I think he only had one full season under his belt heading into this past year. So to go in essentially his second full season in the NHL, to be fifth on your Norris voting, and then ranking, where was he on this list? 14th, as the 14th best defenseman in the NHL. What a season, right? And he was huge for Dallas because they were without Miro Heiskanen for a while. He came back in the playoffs, and so now Dallas has two guys.
Yeah, and I thought one of the most telling things was Heiskanen goes down, Harley gets bumped up to quarterback in their top power play unit.
Never looked back.
And their power play got red hot with him running it. Which so like he was good defensively, but that I think was also kind of like his coming out party offensively, where it was like, oh, he's actually got some real skill out there too.
Yeah, and like I said, Heiskanen, you would think would come back and potentially get that spot back, but no, he was running the second power play, which goes to show in the world of Charlie McAvoy, you can be a top defenseman in the league and not necessarily have PP1 minutes if you don't take advantage of it. So
well, and who ran Dallas's power play, who might have been in charge of that tough decision to keep Heiskanen off of it.
Mr. Steve Spott.
That would be Steve Spott, now the Bruins power play coach.
All right, Scott. So we got a few more things we wanted to talk about before we get to a few mailbag questions. So why don't we jump back to your opening shift quickly? And I think you and I both, we very much agree, and most people listening, I think, agree that it's the right thing for Hagens to go back to Boston College. And we've talked about it before on the podcast and off, those reasons why. But regarding the video you posted of interviewing him, he very much said after the draft that he felt as though he was ready for the NHL and he wanted to be a Bruin and wanted to have the fast track to Boston, as any competitive individual would want for themselves. But clearly he said to you all the right things to the contrary about what's beneficial to going back to BC. So I'm sure there's a part of him deep down that is like, yeah, I wish I was, going pro. But I do think that he was being genuine in what he said to you. And I think that there sometimes in life we want something, and then the people around us, kind of have a conversation and you start to see all angles. And I genuinely think that he sees the benefit of going back to BC. I don't think that was just lip service. And I think he is looking forward to the opportunity. And he knows he's not, patience is a virtue, but he knows he's not going to be waiting too long before being a pro. He very well may be a pro come next spring, and probably at the latest next fall. So
yeah. And I had kind of mentioned this when, at some point after development camp, we were talking about, hey, why hasn't Hagens made a decision? Might have even been a mailbag question. Like, is it kind of weird? Like we haven't heard a decision yet. And my take on it, and this was, it was a little bit of informed guessing on how the Bruins handled it, was they laid out their case to him, explained why they thought another year BC would be good for him, which I do think is what the organization wanted. I think we pretty much heard as much from Adam McQuaid at the end of development camp, where he said, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but something along the lines of like, we're glad he wants it. He said, like, it's a conversation we'll have to have where we're glad that he wants to be in the NHL right away, but there's no reason to rush it, something along those lines. But I think the Bruins weren't going to force his hand. If he was really adamant that I don't want to go back to BC, I want to be a pro now, they might not have been, 100% thrilled with it, but I actually think they would have signed him. But I think they made their case and then gave him kind of the time and space to talk it through with the people he needed to talk it through with and come to his own decision. And you're right. Like, he, whether it's family, his agent / advisor, people at BC, people with the Bruins. Like, yeah, eventually he got there. He probably needed a little bit of time. It probably was a little disappointing. I'm sure. I think one thing that's interesting here is like, I'm sure what he would really like is what major junior guys get, which is that chance to go to training camp, try out for the team. If you're in major juniors, you can even play up to 9 regular season NHL games before the team decides whether to send you back or keep you around for the year. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way when you're in college. In this like new NCAA versus CHL landscape, NCAA has a lot of advantages, which is why you're seeing so many top Canadian players now come to college hockey. But that is one advantage that the CHL still has is like, hey, if you think you're like right on the fringe and you really want to go to training camp and give yourself a shot, well, you can do that in the CHL because the NHL team can keep you around into October and then finally send you back. College, you have to make your decision now. Like you have to make it, they're going to be on the ice at BC in probably 3 weeks, like early September, basically right when they get on campus, they start practices. So, you can't like drag this out into training camp or anything like that. So, but yeah, eventually he got there, and it seems like he got there for the right reasons and understands the long game of it all, and not, yeah, everyone wants to play in the NHL, but like it's going to be there for him, like you said, probably as soon as this spring, certainly next fall.
And he's probably excited knowing he's the guy on campus. Like last year, he certainly knew he was going to be a prominent player for BC. He was coming in as the early projected number 1 overall pick in the upcoming draft. He was playing alongside Gabe Perreault, and Ryan Leonard probably knew he was going to BC to replace Will Smith as their top center. So he knew going into last year that he was one of the guys on campus, right? But he knows it's his team this year, which is different. Like, yes, he was their number 1 center last year, but it was Ryan Leonard's team and Gabe Perreault's team and, some of the seniors as well. But it's his team. This is his team, undoubtedly. And I think that as a competitor, as somebody who has been involved with the program for the last year plus, I think he's probably also simultaneously very excited for that opportunity and to claim that team as his own. I know it's an ultimate team sport. I'm not saying he's going to be selfish, but he knows that that team is going to run through him, and their success is going to be mainly predicated on how he does offensively, all 3 zones, for sure. But like, he's going to be one of the most prominent players that NCAA has to offer next season in a year that I think is their deepest high-end talent pool in league history, in conference history, whatever you want to call it. So I'm sure that's exciting for him.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to compare him to some of those other top players. Like Porter Martone went 1 pick ahead of him. He's going to be at Michigan State. Roger McQueen was a top 10 pick. He's going to be at Providence. Two of the guys vying to go number 1 overall next year, playing college hockey. Gavin McKenna at Penn State. Keaton Vierhoff out in North Dakota, roommate of Will Zellers. Those 2 guys, McKenna and Vierhoff, like they're going to be in the situation Hagens was in last year, being an underage freshman going into their draft year. So kind of just monitoring like all those comparison points, does one of Hagens or Martone look significantly better than the other? Does one of them produce much more than the other? Does Gavin McKenna produce in that draft year -1 at a Hagens rate or closer to a Macklin Celebrini rate? Because that was a pretty big gap between, Hagens was a point per game. Celebrini was like 1.6, 1.7 points per game. So I'm just going to be interested to see like how all those guys do, and how BC does in general. Obviously, Hagens is not alone as a Bruins prospect there. There's Will Moore, their second-round pick this year, Andre Gasso, Oscar Yelvik, Dean Letourneau, their first-round pick last year, Christian Kostadinsky on defense, there's 6 of them. So seeing how all those guys play, but also how that team performs, because I also asked Hagens about like his goals for this season, and we've heard this from him before. He said to win, like period. He said we didn't win last year. They were the number 1 team, basically start to finish, all season long, but didn't win the Beanpot, did not win the Hockey East tournament. In fact, got knocked out in the quarterfinals of the Hockey East tournament, and did not win the national championship. Didn't even get to the Frozen Four. Got knocked out by Denver in the regional finals. So it's a team that I think looks a little worse on paper. Like they didn't really bring in any super high-end freshmen to replace the likes of Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault. And they also have a big question in goal with Jacob Fowler departing. So on paper, they look a little worse to me, but they should still, I imagine they're still going to be a preseason, definitely top 10, probably a top 5 team. So the expectations should still be pretty high for them, and clearly are, based on the way Hagens talks about, wanting to compete for and win a national championship.
Exactly. And, when you look at Hagens on BC next year, because one thing I hear a lot of people say is, and I'm not disagreeing with it, but I hear them say, man, Hagens had 37 points in 37 games last year. You should pencil him in for 50, 60 points easy. Right. And I expect him to be a 50 plus point guy, right? I do expect him to grow. In fact, if he doesn't, then it's a little bit concerning. But I guess where I'm going is he was able to score at that pace last year, in part because he had incredible line mates for much of the season. He wasn't with those 2 players all year. So he doesn't have Leonard this year. He doesn't have Perreault this year. So one could say it might be tougher for him to get back to 37 points because he doesn't have those line mates for most of the year. But the other side of it is maybe because he deferred so much, because he had those guys in his line, maybe he didn't produce as much as maybe he could have because he was focused on distributing and whatnot. So maybe not having those guys next year could help free up his game, he is the guy. He's where everything's going through. So it'll be interesting to see what that delta is between scoring without Leonard and Perreault versus scoring with Leonard and Perreault versus scoring without Leonard and Perreault, because I think there's pros and cons to having 2 elite guys on your line because you defer to them and whatnot. But when they're not there, it more runs through you. So I think opportunity presents itself a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And great players, which Hagens should be at the college level, produce a lot, kind of regardless of their line mates. Like, obviously, you got to have like a baseline, like they need to be good line mates, but they shouldn't have to be elite. Macklin Celebrini didn't have elite wings when his year at BU. Jack Eichel. Now, Evan Rodriguez turned out to be a better player than anyone really knew at the time because he was undrafted. But it was Evan Rodriguez and Danny O'Regan. And Hagens is still going to have good line mates. One of them is almost certainly going to be Teddy Stiga, who I think is a really good player. I believe he was also a first-round pick of Nashville.
Yeah,
in the 20s. Hagens played with him at the development program. They played together at the World Junior Showcase this summer. There's a lot of chemistry there. The other wing on that line probably open a little bit. Might be some competition. Maybe it ends up being a Yelvik or Gasso or the kid who transferred in from UNH, Ryan Conmey. He was UNH's leading scorer last year. I assume he's going to be on one of BC's top 2 lines, so could be him. But like that should still be a line that produces a lot. I would still expect that to be, maybe not. It's not going to be like Perreault, Smith, Leonard 2 years ago where they're all putting up like 70 points in a season, but that could and probably should be one of the best lines in the country. I would think.
Okay, so moving on to our final topic, a couple of mailbag questions. So Jim Montgomery went on the Empty Netters podcast, and if those listening to this podcast haven't heard it, you should do so. It was a very good listen, and of course, talked about his time as a player in Maine, coaching at the USHL level, at Denver in college, his time in Dallas, Boston, St. Louis. So, sticking to the Boston element of it, Scott, were there what about his Boston conversation on the Empty Netters podcast stood out to you? What takeaways did you have regarding Jim Montgomery? And potentially what may have gone wrong in the room the last year plus, and if those problems, if you're worried about those problems still being there despite Monty not being in Boston anymore.
Yeah, he said the culture slipped, which I thought was really telling and really stood out to me. And like, I guess like shouldn't be surprising just based on what we all saw with our eyes last season and how it played out and all the. I think culture slipping like feeds into why was training camp such a mess? Feeds into Rich Keefe reporting about this rift between Martian and Pasternak, which, whether you want to believe that or not, something like that doesn't even get out if everything's going well in the room. And Montgomery said that you have to work on culture every day. And he put some of this on himself. He said, like, I didn't recognize it soon enough, and I didn't really do enough to address it right away when I saw it. But this lines up with like just things I've heard since the end of the season, just kind of about like what last season was like. It seems like, and I think this includes Montgomery, that there were just a lot of people on and around the team just kind of caught up in their own thing and like almost running their own race. And that, you know, when people talk about the Bruins culture, all those years under Char and Bergeron, what they really mean is like how together the team is, how it's everyone on the same page. There's no cliques. There's no lone wolves off doing their own thing. It's like, it really is truly all for one for all. And they're all friends and they get along and the locker room's upbeat every day and they're chirping each other in practice. And it just truly feels like a team. And it seems like, again, just not just going off Montgomery's comments, but of like other things I've heard, it seems like that just kind of wasn't there last year for whatever reason. And it's not going to be like one thing or one person to blame, but it's your head coach doesn't have a contract but beyond the season. Even if it's not on purpose, he's thinking about that and worried about that and maybe not as invested on what's happening right in front of him. Your captain, Brad Marchand, misses the start of training camp because he had, 3-4 offseason surgeries, and also doesn't have a contract beyond the year that he's going to be thinking about. David Pasternak acknowledged that, you know, coming off his injury at the end of the previous season at the World Championships, that it took him a little longer to get to where he wanted to be. So there's something to distract David Pasternak that might take his attention away from what's going on every single day right in front of him in the locker room. And then, you know, McAvoy ends up getting injured. Hampus Lindholm gets injured early on. Other guys have contract situations, you know, like Jeremy Swayman obviously like can't, you know, should have mentioned that even sooner, but like obviously he's got his whole public contract dispute, isn't there for any of training camp. And
meanwhile, his teammates are answering questions about it.
Right. And it's like, you know, Elias Lindholm comes in, you expect him to be a big part of the team. He gets injured on day one of training camp and misses 2 weeks. And then tells us after the season that he didn't feel like himself until the second half of the year. And it's just all of these things together. It's like, it's human nature that if your body and your game isn't where you want it to be, or your contract situation isn't what you want, that you're focused on getting yourself right. Right? Like, how can I try to get my teammates right if I can't even get myself right? Well, when you have that many people all kind of stuck in that of like, I just got to get my own game, my own body into a good spot. Well, now like no one's really focusing on getting the team right in the way that they need to. And I think all that just kind of piled up. And so when I hear Jim Montgomery say the culture slipped, like that's what I think that means. Like that's how I think that actually shows itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Scott. That's exactly how I interpreted it. And I think that we've talked about it all along. But it was everything that could have gone wrong for the Bruins last year went wrong. Yes, ultimately they still lacked talent to win a Stanley Cup. They lacked talent to be one of the better teams in the league. But if that pre-trade deadline roster hit the ground running and didn't have all of the distractions and off-ice issues and individual issues that you just outlined, Scott, they wouldn't have been as bad as they played last year. That team, sometimes teams overperform, sometimes teams underperform. That Bruins team pre-deadline, they underperformed. I'm not saying that they should have been a top team in the league, but they underperformed. It was a snowball effect, and ultimately, I'm glad that they did underperform because I felt like you know they needed to stop putting band-aids on what were things that the team kind of needed surgery, right? Like they needed to go back and replenish their prospect system. You had to address the center ice, right? Beyond Elias Lindholm. He's a band-aid, right? We don't have Bergeron, we don't have Krejci, we don't have anybody internal. We need to get the top center available in free agency. He was a band-aid. And so I'm glad that things happened the way that it happened. Their day of reckoning as an organization was necessary and it came. But I do think that, because I could sit here and say, well, who's responsible? Who's to blame for the culture slipping and sliding? Like you can't tell me there weren't enough professionals in that room between Brad Marchand, Charlie McAvoy, Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo. Like there's a lot of guys in that room that their character has never been questioned before. So it's not like they didn't know to practice hard, but for some reason their practices were soft. Like the training camp was soft. Their practices were soft. They're glorified morning skates. That might be an NHL thing more so than a Bruins thing, but those Bruins teams of the late 2000s and early 20 teens that had the successes that they did, that were led by Bergeron and Chara. You hear all the time from guys that were around back then. They played each other hard against each other harder in practice than they did against their opponents in games. It felt like they iron sharpens iron, and those teams practiced their ass off at Ristusha Arena back in the day. And maybe the culture of the NHL has changed since then, certainly in many ways, but last year's team just didn't strike me as a team that was very intense during practices. And Marco Sturmers talked about, he was a part of those teams. You're smirking. You get something's turning in your head. What's going on?
I was gonna say Ristusha will harden a person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. How could you drive up 93? In the middle of February, right? You're bumper to bumper traffic. It's freezing. You Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Walk into that lobby, smell the rubber mats, smell the gasoline from the Zambonis, and be freezing your nuts off and not go out there and skate hard during practice, especially with Chara out there, making sure that you do. But yeah, I just think, why did the culture slip? I think you're right, Scott. I think everybody kind of had their own agendas, and I think people put themselves before the team, and that's a no-no. You have to put the team first, but at the same time, like, this is their jobs, it's their livelihoods, right? So Jim Montgomery is going to worry about his next contract. Brad Marchand's going to worry about his contract. So it's easy to say you got to put the team before yourself, but okay, yourself isn't just yourself as a professional athlete. It's your family, right? It's your loved ones that you're trying to provide for. So it's not that simple, and shit happens. So the question I have for you now, Scott, is do you have, you know, optimism that the guys in the room that pre-existed this current free agency class, that you can now add those guys to the mix as well? Do you feel that this group with Marco Sturm can reestablish that culture?
I, I think they can, but I can't sit here and tell you I'm 100% confident that they will. I think so much of this comes down to how good David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy are going to be at that. We've talked about it, like, regardless of what letters they're wearing or who eventually gets to see or any of that, like, this is their team and they have help. There's other leaders in there, but how these next few years of Bruins hockey go, in large part, will come down to what kind of example and culture Pastrnak and McAvoy set, and how well they do in getting everyone to buy into it. Obviously, those two guys play on the ice is going to be extremely important. We know that, and it's, the culture isn't all on two guys, but who sets it? Like, yeah, that's going to be them, and they just haven't had to do that before. So they've been part of it. They've both worn letters. They've been around. They both played with Chara. They both played with Bergeron for many years. They saw Marchand as captain. Like, now they have to actually do it, though. It's one thing to watch how other people do it and think like, oh, okay, I want to be like them, or maybe I want to even do something different. But then it's another to actually do it. Like, again, talking about like the culture slipping last year, it's like, it's not because Brad Marchand wanted that to happen, right? Like, Brad Marchand cared a lot. As much as like anyone you'll come across, Brad Marchand cared about the Bruins winning. He wanted to be a great captain. He wanted that team to be a lot better last year. But sometimes it takes more than just good intentions, right? Like Montgomery says, it takes every day. Like, it has to be an everyday thing. It's not get together for some summer meetings, lay out a plan, have a good start to training camp. Like, then it has to continue every single day, all season long. So can they do it? Yes, but it's also very fair to wonder if they actually will succeed, just because they haven't done it. So we can't guarantee that.
Right, and I think a key to it is you have to have trust in the guy next to you. And Jeremy Swayman was on a Nesson podcast recently with Sophia, and he said that he felt like last year at times guys were trying to do too much. And I think that happens especially when things are going bad, right? When things are going poorly for an individual and poorly for the team, I do think that sometimes it's human nature to want to do, extra to make sure that you get back on the right track. And the reality is it doesn't work that way, because now there's a lack of cohesion, and everybody has to you have to just do your part. And that's something that, like, Andrew Ference said, I think it was Andrew Ference on a podcast last year, but that's what Zdeno Chara did so well as a leader. He said Chara was so good at delegating roles for everybody and making sure everybody knew, like, to pull on the rope in their own way. And it just comes down to trusting the guy next to you. So that's something as well. And I think Jeremy Swayman is going to be massive to the Bruins' success too. Like, I think he was way too much of a distraction last year. I think, whether he wanted to be or not, he was. I think he had to learn some lessons too. Like, you can't go on a podcast in the middle of the summer when you're in the middle of contract negotiations and discuss it, because people are going to run with it and it's going to become a distraction. And that's exactly what happened. And then he's holding out. His teammates are answering about it in the room. And then his play last year wasn't very great either. So I know he's excited to right the ship for himself personally. And I think he needs to be a good leader as well for the Bruins, even if that just means kind of just, going under the radar and just doing your job well. Right. Just don't. Sometimes the best way to lead is just don't be a distraction. Just do your thing. And so he's another guy that, we talk about McAvoy and Pasternak and respect, understandably so. Swayman to me is another one too. Like the contract he's on, they need him to be a leader on and off the ice, and I would say a quiet leader would be the best role for him. So we'll see what happens, Scott. You're right. It is a day in, day out thing.
Yeah, it's gonna be fascinating. Like, I'll keep going back to it because we're gonna talk about it a lot, but like, just the Pasternak and McAvoy of it all, of like, what are the Boston Bruins gonna be on their watch? And like, I'm not even talking about wins and losses as it relates to this season in particular, because I think we all know this is kind of step one of this next era, and you don't want them to be like the worst team in the league and losing 55 games or something, but like, it's not the most important thing this year. Getting back to good habits, good chemistry, being hardworking, all that, like establishing that foundation and then building off it as they add more talent, which is obviously something the front office is going to need to do. But the day in, day out stuff, like, that's what they can control.
Yeah, and if you look at their roster right now, like, it's clear there's a lack of you're missing a couple of high end pieces, right, to really be a team that you want to be. But contracts aside, right, you look at the guys they brought in: Tanner Jeannot, Victor Arvidsson, Sean Corrali, Michael Easymont, but more so the first three I said. Like, those are guys that those are going to be good character guys in the room, and you add them to Hampus Lindholm, Elias Lindholm, Pavel Zacha, Nikita Zadorov. There should be enough good character guys in that room to support Pasternak and McAvoy as they make this first leap as the guys. And I think that's important too. So, and I think that's why you saw the Bruins have the offseason that they did in a certain respect. So,
all right, want to bang out a couple mailbag questions?
Let's do a couple. You want to read them, or you want me to?
Sure, I can read them.
All right.
We'll start with Roger, who has sent a couple in, but I'll start with this. It doesn't seem Cam Neely and Charlie Jacobs blamed Don Sweeney last season for some failure due to key player injuries, both Lindholm's, McAvoy, Marchand, Kastelik. But if Jeremy Swayman has another average season this year, right before his long no-trade clause kicks in, could that be the end of Sweeney? Would Sweeney's job be in danger if Marco Sturm doesn't further develop any of this year's crop of prospects or, say / young players? Is there a GM offense worse than making a bad long-term signing or hiring a coach that is a mismatch for the team given to him?
Well, he should be. He should be on the hot seat and let go if like, you can't have the year you had last year and then follow that up with another shit season, but then have the silver lining be, well, we're closer to getting McKenna. Well, okay, yeah, because you sucked. Like your moves didn't work, and
right.
And even like
Gavin McKenna can be the next GM's reward.
Right, exactly, and like even James Hagens, like, he fell to you. You had to not select him at number 7 overall. I mean, would have been fireable right then. So can I give him credit for making the selection? Yeah, like, I'm not gonna take credit from him, but I'm not gonna give him a huge pat on the back for it. It was an obvious choice. So yeah, I mean, I think I definitely think that Sweeney's job. I can't say if it's going to be on, if he is in the hot seat, because he's very close with Neely and he's very close with ownership. But should he be? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like, Roger's right. Like, those would be the moves that ultimately get you fired. Like, and I would add well, we've talked about it before. Zadorov, I actually think, played pretty well the second half of the season, so probably have less of an issue there. But like, you are going to need more from Elias Lindholm as well, right? And obviously Swayman to bounce back. You can't have multiple bad long-term contracts stuck on your roster. And then, if you add in like maybe Sturm's not the right coach, that would just be several too many mistakes. Peter Chiarelli got fired for less. He got fired because he ran into cap issues with a few bad depth contracts, the Jerome McGinley bonuses, and like that was enough. Like he ran into cap issues, couldn't get out of it. That was the end for Peter Chiarelli. Well, if Don Sweeney runs you into a corner where you now have multiple bad contracts that can't be moved, and he hired a coach who isn't really working out, like, yeah, I think you'd have to. I've said from when they extended him that I thought that bought Sweeney 2 years because he had 1 year left this upcoming season, and then he got a 2-year extension. I think teams are totally willing to move off of the final year of a contract, whether that's a GM or a coach. Usually you're not going to buy out 2 years, but if this season really goes south, then this could be the kind of situation that calls for it. And he could end up fired before the new contract technically ever kicks in.
Yeah, and I will say, because in one breath I mentioned that Hagens fell to him, right? And that you have to be an absolute moron to not take James Hagens at 7 overall. That said, I will give him credit for being in a position, recognizing that his team was going down a dead end road last year and that they needed to sell. So I will give him credit for the sell job, because I thought that the trade deadline was very well done by the Bruins. Like, and I know the Marchand thing sparked a lot of controversy. You know, if he doesn't go on to win a Stanley Cup, I don't think it's as talked about, but he does. But you get a first for him. I love the Coyle trade. If we're talking long term, like big picture, I loved getting a second Zellers and Middlestat for Coyle. I love getting a first and Minton for Carlo. Right, so the deadline was good, and in doing so, in selling, of course, the Bruins slid down the standings, as we all hoped that they would after that deadline. And that put them in a position to even finish 5th last and then fall to 7th overall in the draft and get Hagens. So I will give them credit for doing what they were supposed to do as the season went along. But you're supposed to do good shit as a GM, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you had a good deadline and you sold like you were supposed to. So no, like you're supposed to do well with your job. I'm not gonna throw you a parade for doing what was supposed to be done. I'm not gonna say, oh, he shouldn't be fired next year because they had a good deadline at selling pieces in 2025. So like, good for you, good job there. But like, yeah, that doesn't exonerate you from potentially being fired if next year goes to shit too.
All right, I'm gonna skip Roger's second question for now, just in the sake of time and getting in some other people. Brian, we have a mailbag fashion segment.
Ooh, wow.
Katie says, hi guys, maybe you addressed this already, but I have a question about Bruins jerseys and NHL jerseys as a whole. Why don't the Bruins have City Connect jerseys the same way the Red Sox do, for example? I'll also add the NBA has something like this. I forget what they call theirs, but jerseys that are meant to like reflect the city. Red Sox fans, me included, love the yellow and blue and the new Fenway green alternate jerseys. It gives you something more to love and something exciting to look at. I know the league has experimented with reverse retro jerseys, which were great, and certain teams are rebranding with new colors, but the reverse retro aesthetic seemingly dealt with the history of the team rather than the current and possibly future connection to the city. That city connection and all of its possible bright, vibrant colors would be fun to see. So, Brian, what do you think about the idea of NHL teams having City Connect style jerseys where maybe they're not sticking to the true team colors, but you're reflecting something about the city?
It's a good question. I'll start off by saying I absolutely love the Red Sox City Connect jerseys and their Green Monster jerseys. I think they're outstanding. So, and the Red Sox have as traditional uniforms as you have in sports, right? Like, because my mind wants to say, I don't know what the Bruins, like, I can't picture the Bruins in other colors, but I couldn't picture the Red Sox in other colors either. And here they are. I'm not sure if it's a difference in sport and culture. I have a hard time envisioning it with the hockey teams, but I can't say I wouldn't be open to it. Like, you kind of see, like, I'm picturing like the Philadelphia Flyers having, like a uniform that's red, white, and blue with like a Liberty Bell in the center of it. Like, that could be cool, right? Like, if you wore it like 2 or 3 home games a year. And then like the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have those St. Pat's uniforms that obviously is a tribute to a pre-existing team in Toronto. But like, could the Bruins have like a St. Patrick's, like an Irish themed uniform? I just because it's hard for me to envision how the NHL would execute it, doesn't mean I'm totally against the idea of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, it is hard to imagine, because I was thinking, like, Bruins are obviously, they're kind of right in the middle, like they're right near like the Freedom Trail and like all the history and stuff. And it's like, can you do something like revolutionary theme, like kind of along what you were just saying with like Philly? Like, maybe the Bruins would have something red, white, blue, and that's like, but you already have like the Patriots are
Yeah.
all in on like that scheme. Even the Revolution, the Red Sox use those colors, even if that's not necessarily the basis for it. So yeah, like, I'm with you. Like, I wouldn't rule it out, because I think a lot of baseball teams have done some really cool things with it. NBA, I feel like, has been a little more hit or miss, but there have been some good ones. Like the Celtics had one that incorporated, but like it incorporated like the parquet design, which is like more team related. But yeah, so I would be open to it. Like, I would like to see what it looks like, but it is a little harder for me to envision um than it was with baseball.
Well, and now that I think about the Red Sox jerseys, the logos aren't different. Like, it's still like the City Connects say Boston. The yellow ones, they say Boston, which is kind of what the Red Sox road jerseys always say Boston. And then the Fenway Green Monster jerseys say Red Sox. So if we're to draw a parallel comparison to the Bruins, it would still have to be a Bruins logo that they use or something. So like, you couldn't just have you know, it wouldn't just be like some AI generated image of the Boston Tea Party on their on their logo, or the Zakem Bridge, right? Like, in different cut, like, because now it's like you don't even know what you're watching. So it's the Bruins, but they're wearing green and blue, but the logo's a Zakem. It's like, who the fuck am I watching right now? So it would still have to be like a Bruins logo, just with different colors. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And I'm not sure what those colors would be. And it would be weird to see the Bruins spoke be in like anything other than that. So we all know how I felt about the Centennial jerseys. That was that was straying off the course enough for me to raise my eyebrows. But
Yeah, the Red Sox ones do have like slightly different fonts, like the yellow and blue ones, which are modeled after the marathon finish line. Like, they have kind of like that marathon lettering. So you could do something like that. Like, it's like, would you ever see a Bruins jersey that doesn't have the spoked B on the front? Right. Well, I guess we have. Like, we've
oh
seen
yeah,
that. We've seen Blue
yeah,
Bear. So like, could you get like Boston, like a written script, like something like the Red Sox have done,
yeah.
where it's incorporating some different style? I don't know, like maybe it's in like Mike's pastry font or something.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the Montreal Canadiens, when they had one of their reverse retros, it was they were modeled after, they were hockey uniforms in the color scheme of the Montreal Expos. Ironically, Scott's wearing an Expos hat right now. But that had the Canadiens logo on it. Now, the Montreal Canadiens are as traditional as a hockey team could possibly be when it comes to their uniforms, and I'm sure that had some controversy around it, maybe in Montreal. I thought it was a pretty cool look for for, a one-off type thing. So, like I said, it's for some reason with hockey, with the socks and the pants and the helmet and the gloves, there's so many elements to a hockey uniform that it's tough for me to envision it. Whereas baseball, it's like, yeah, you just got to get some pants and a jersey and a hat. But like I said, I would be open to the idea of something fun like that. It's harder to envision for hockey, but sure, why not?
Throw Sam Adams on there with holding up the beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's do one more here before we get out. This is from at Bruins77_7. This was the YouTube comment. Question: I heard on multiple podcasts that this kid Mate Blumel can crack the lineup because he can score. Why would the Stars give him up then if that's the case? Or is he just another Georgi Merkulov, good at the AHL level, but that's it? What exactly is the main reason for the optimism? Can you guys elaborate?
It's a fair question. It remains to be seen. I think to the crux of the question, why is there optimism? I think you and I have been more like, we don't really know. I do think that there are some out there that are penciling him in right now as like a third liner or a second liner. It's like, well, he's 25 and he has one NHL point, maybe two. I'm not saying that to demean what he's done. I'm just saying, like, I'm just illustrating the fact that he's anything but a certainty. So I have the same questions. Like, I haven't watched him. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I watched. What's Dallas's affiliate's name? Where are they from?
The Texas Stars. They play. Where do they play? Do they play in Houston?
Yeah, that may be. I mean, I've watched his highlights since the Bruins acquired him. I think ultimately, like, to bring up Georgi Merkulov is fair. Like, my concern about Georgi Merkulov at the NHL level is that he doesn't have the speed, the separation speed to make plays at the NHL level that he makes at the AHL level. So,
by the way, they play in Cedar Park, which is near Austin.
Oh, okay.
I'm not good on Texas geography. Never been to Texas, actually.
Austin, I think Austin's smack dab in the center of Texas. I've been to Austin and I've been to Dallas. Pretty cool. But
I've had a very brief stopover in Dallas on a flight to Tulsa, Oklahoma, of all places.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. In college, I covered BU basketball in the NCAA tournament, and that's where they were for the first round, was Tulsa. Probably not a city you really need to go to for any other reason. Wasn't a whole lot to do there.
Yeah, I mean, I could recommend Austin for people. I think it just depends what you're going there for. But I mean, I've been to Austin once, and the best way I could describe it is it's kind of like a Longhorn Steakhouse meets a Jamba Juice. Like, it's very Texas, but at the same time, it's kind of like it's like kind of like liberal and young and stuff. And so it's kind of like this like weird blend. But I think it's East 6th Street, I think is what it is. It's a road with just all bars on both sides, no covers, and every bar is like unique to itself. It's pretty cool, and the food's really good there too.
I would love to go to Austin. Like, if it was just me going on my own and like not to cover the Bruins or something, like that's where I would go in Texas for sure.
Pretty cool.
But by the way, maybe Austin gets an NHL team. I don't know if you saw, this was like maybe last week or the week before, but the NHL like opened the expansion bidding process. So this is just like, I think we all know it's like the worst kept secret that the NHL is going to expand again at some point with 2 more teams and then maybe even 2 more somewhere after that.
Jesus.
But everyone assumes, and maybe we shouldn't assume, but it seems likely that Atlanta is one. And then felt like a lot of people were penciling in Houston for the second, but a group out of Austin like submitted a proposal, and we're like way off topic, but I can actually see that really working for the NHL, where Austin doesn't have a team in any of the 4 major sports right now. They have a soccer team, but you could kind of be like the NHL was in Vegas, the in on a ground floor in a rapidly growing city.
Yeah, and that's fair. You know, I every time expansion talks come up, it breaks my heart that Quebec is not included. And we had Pierre Maguire on last year, and I asked him about that, and I just don't. He doesn't think it's ever going to be a fit again. Like when it comes to this, I, there would never be a Quebec insert team name here. If you want to call it the Nordiques, we'll just call it that for now. There would never be a Quebec NHL team that didn't have a sold out practice preseason game or regular season game, and their merch would kill. But I think it comes down to like TV deals. But let me ask you a question: why is Winnipeg? What's better about Winnipeg financially than Quebec?
I honestly, if a team were relocating today, like if Atlanta was relocating now, I don't think they'd go to Winnipeg. I think because I think what Winnipeg does is like it highlights the exact same problem Quebec would have, which is like the limited overall reach that a smaller Canadian market is going to have. Like we know the people there are going to be bonkers, right? Like you're going to sell out. There's going to be a fever among the local fans. And then like we were just saying earlier, you're never going to see them on US TV. And there's not going to be any appeal kind of beyond their city and surrounding towns. And the NHL just wants to aim higher, and like sometimes they've missed when they've done that, right? The Thrashers never got off the ground in part because they had bad ownership. Arizona eventually has to move, technically I guess they shut down and Utah starts as a new team, but yeah, they're going to target big US markets because they just think there's so much more growth potential there than there would be in Canada. So like the only way Quebec would ever get a team is if someone rich enough buys a struggling US team and wants to relocate them there, and there isn't a better group in another US city bidding on them. Is basically the only way it could happen.
Yeah, I guess it's just, I feel so bad for the Quebec City natives and surrounding town, people, citizens, because you talk about just the worst luck in the world. They had the team. They had the team. They had Joe Sakic. They had Peter Forsberg. They had that team in 1995. And then they go to Colorado in 1996, the year after they lose them, and they win the Stanley Cup. So the team that should have been theirs, the cup should have been Quebec's in 1996, and it was
Well,
Colorado's.
but one major wrench thrown into that is, would Montreal have ever traded Patrick Waugh to Quebec, who was a rival? Instead,
Oh, that's a fair
they
question.
were
Yeah.
they were totally willing to ship him out west to
Yeah,
Colorado.
that's a great point, Scott. That's a great point. But man, first of all, as you know, Quebec City is fucking awesome. I love Quebec
Yeah.
City. The rivals that they would have with Montreal, Toronto, Boston, Buffalo, like that, it would make like I honestly think that similar to Buffalo, like I think Quebec would have an awesome TV market with hockey, and I don't know. I mean, like we can sit here and talk about that all we want. The Ottawa Senators, yeah, it's the nation's capital in Canada. They play like 45 minutes outside Ottawa and in the middle of a wheat field, like for Christ's sake. So,
By the
I
way, their new arena deal just got approved, so I
oh, good
think
for them.
they're officially going to be starting on that, and that will be downtown, so that'll be much nicer.
And I also think that Quebec City being, on the East Coast, it's a little bit different than like a Winnipeg. Like you do have that proximity to travel and stuff, and fans travel well. But anyway, we digress. Matej Blumel. So
So
I
he's going to be playing in Quebec this year. What the hell's happening?
yeah, exactly. To the question, I think people are just looking at why are they optimistic. I think that they see that he's put up what over a point per game in the AHL for the last 2 or 3 seasons, and maybe he's just a diamond in the rough. And I think that you know, yeah, it remains to be seen on him. I'm not sold. Can he make plays at the speed that the NHL requires to make plays? I don't know.
Yeah, and I also think like if you look up his highlights on social media or on YouTube or whatever, like
He's
there's
not an
some
explosive skater.
but like there's some legit skill there. Like he makes some nice stick handling moves, some good dekes, has some nice finishes. So like you can talk yourself into it pretty easily. But you're right. Like there's a reason it hasn't happened at the NHL level yet. That doesn't mean it can't or won't. But yeah, I'm with you, and I've said that before. Like I need to see it. I'm very open to it. If I sit there at Warrior and see him look really good in training camp and in preseason games, like great. Like I'll pencil him into the roster.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm more on the skeptical, like, let me see it against NHL competition first.
He's a crafty player, and that's why he gets a lot of his points, because at the AHL level he does have the ability to finish with the puck on his stick in tight, but I don't even at the AHL level, I don't see a lot of his goals coming from bursts of speed. He kind of knows where to be, and that's admirable. That's great to have that hockey IQ. But the reason why I get excited about a prospect like Dan Zlashmelis, for example, is because I see his ability. I think his skating ability will translate to the NHL level. I think he'll be able to make plays at the NHL because I think he's a very good skater. Now, I'm not saying I'm anointing him to the NHL roster right now, but that's why I get excited about a prospect like that more so than Blumel, because I think that one player's skating can translate better. But to your point, Scott, I am open to being proven wrong and let the best player make the team, right? So we'll find out soon enough. All right. Any final thoughts on that?
No. I think I'm ready to wrap up. Hour and a half, that's my limit.
Yeah.
Tanks on empty.
Yeah, I hear you.
Send us mailbag questions.
Yes.
Skatepod at weei.com, at the skatepod on Twitter. Leave a comment on YouTube.
Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.